China is learning from Russia. Nuclear weapons are a very valuable threat. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Matt Gnezda, filling in for Chris Chappell, who is testing our newest business venture, nuclear fallout shelters. Why? Well, the Chinese Communist Party is terrified the US will overthrow the regime, and in their desperation, the party is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal as a means of striking back. Which seems dramatic. You know how paranoid your friend with all the guns sounds when he says he needs them just in case the government comes after him? Well, that's basically Xi Jinping's foreign policy, but with nukes. But that's not me saying China is stockpiling nukes to safeguard against regime change. It's people close to the Chinese leadership who spoke to the Wall Street Journal. They said China's increased focus on nuclear weapons is driven by fears Washington might seek to topple Beijing's communist government following a more hawkish turn in U.S. policy toward China under the Trump and Biden administrations. Now, keep in mind, the fact that people close to China's leadership are talking about this to the Wall Street Journal means this is information the Communist Party wants out there. It wants Americans to fear that the U.S. government's harder stance on China could lead to nuclear war, which means the only thing to do is to be really nice to China. Yeah, that'll solve the problem. No one knows exactly how many nuclear warheads China has. The Pentagon estimates that by the end of the decade, China will have about 1,000 warheads. That's still far less than the roughly 4,000 warheads held by the US and Russia. Then again, any number of nukes is a scary number. It only takes about 100 to destroy all of humanity. Any more than that, and you're just nuking a dead horse that died from radiation poisoning. China does currently have intercontinental ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear warheads and hit the United States. They're called DF-41s. And satellite images reveal China has massively expanded its missile silos. Each of these is big enough to house a DF-41. Officially, China denies expanding its nuclear program. Yes, China is just building a giant whack-a-mole game in Xinjiang for all the happy Uyghurs it totally isn't genociding. But if for some reason you don't believe the Chinese regime, then we're faced with the specter of a new Cold War-era nuclear proliferation. That's right, Cold War II, nuclear boogaloo. Only this time it's actually worse. The US and Soviet Union held frequent arms talks from the late 1980s. China has rejected these kinds of talks, which is bad. You know how scary it is when your wife gives you the silent treatment? Well, imagine if she did that and also had nukes. American military officials and security analysts are concerned China's nuclear acceleration could mean it would be willing to make a surprise nuclear strike. There are a lot of unknowns. As the Wall Street Journal says, the Chinese program and Beijing's thinking on the role of nuclear weapons has been shrouded in secrecy. But there's one thing that's clear. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is making Beijing recalculate. I'll have more after the break. Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party is worried the United States will try to overthrow their regime, which is why it's taking a lesson from Vladimir Putin. No, not that lesson, or that lesson. What I mean is, the Chinese Communist Party has vowed to conquer Taiwan, kind of like how Russia is trying to conquer Ukraine. And while the West has retaliated with sanctions against Russia, there's been zero interest from the West in actually committing troops. And not just because nobody wants to go to Russia in the summer, much less the winter. Part of that is because Russia is a nuclear power. Early into the invasion, Putin put nuclear forces on high alert. Putin's threat of nuclear war is a strong deterrent, because as bad as Russia's winter can be, nuclear winter is even worse. On top of that, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's a lesson not lost on China. A retired Chinese military officer with ties to the nuclear program said, "Ukraine lost its nuclear deterrence in the past, and that's why it got into a situation like this. Wow, way to victim blame, dude. What's next? Russia wouldn't have invaded Ukraine if it didn't dress like that? China is determined to go the Russia route. China wants a strong nuclear arsenal to deter the US from using its own nuclear arsenal. But the Chinese regime is also hoping to deter the US from getting involved when they try to take over Taiwan. The Trump administration has said it would consider using nuclear weapons in response to significant non-nuclear attacks on the US or its allies. That's something the Biden administration has also said. But if China can hit the US with a nuke, that calculation may change. And China is doing more than just developing its nuclear arsenal. It's also working towards being able to stop a nuclear attack. China is working with Russia to develop an early warning missile system. In February 2021, China launched a satellite that some analysts believe is the start of a space-based sensor system for missiles. And I know you're probably thinking, why don't we just nuke that satellite? Well, we can't without risking damage to other satellites. That could mean no more cell phones, which would mean no more offers to extend my auto warranty. Maybe we should nuke that satellite. Anyway, last year, the Pentagon was shocked by a Chinese hypersonic missile test, a missile that the US had no proven defense against. Sooner or later, this conflict will come to a head, which is why we're launching our own China Uncensored branded nuclear fallout shelters, the silver lining in every mushroom cloud. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a fan of the show who supports China Uncensored on Patreon. Bruce Johnson asks, "Hey Chris, I know China Uncensored has provided warnings about Westerners traveling to China due to various concerns such as arbitrary detention. My question is, how likely is this to happen? Would you personally feel comfortable traveling there, considering the nature of your work? Should supporters of the show, by extension, have increased concern versus your average Westerner? I'm not planning a trip while the CCP remains in power, but I am quite curious as to just how much the CCP pays attention to us." Good question, Bruce. It's definitely not a good idea for Westerners to travel to China right now. Thanks to COVID, they might detain you for weeks or even months in a horrible quarantine center, and there's nothing at all you can do. But even outside of COVID, Chinese authorities are getting more and more comfortable detaining foreigners for political reasons. And it's especially dangerous for someone like Chris to go. Why do you think I'm hosting the show now? Okay, Chris is not actually in China. He'll be back in a couple weeks. But if he had tried going to China, he would have had a hard time getting a visa. And if he were allowed in, he would have an even harder time getting out. Thanks for your question, Bruce, and thank you for your support on Patreon. For everyone else, please visit patreon.com/China Uncensored and support us with $1 or more per episode. Viewer support is the main way we fund this show. Once again, I'm Matt Gnezda. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.